3 IRA men are shot dead in an SAS ambush. The Catholic primate says military means can't solve the province's problems. Thousands mourn as 3 murdered UDR soldiers are buried.
Good evening. Also this evening in sport, we've goals in Gaelic football at Ballybuffet and goals in soccer at Boston. And tourists in Derry take a step back in time in a village square in the heart of the city. But first, the main news of the day.
SAS soldiers have shot dead a 3-man IRA gang in the Tyrone village of Coagh. The IRA have confirmed they were on what they call active service. It appears the undercover soldiers were acting on intelligence and were lying in wait when the gang drove into the village in a stolen car. The men died in a hail of gunfire, but precise details are still unclear. Sinn Féin has accused the security forces of a shoot-to-kill policy. The DUP leader, the Reverend Ian Paisley, says this is an example of what the security forces can do and that it is now time for a war to the death against the IRA.
It was 7:30 this morning when the peace of the village of Coagh was shattered by what locals described as up to 10 minutes of rapid gunfire. It ended when the Vauxhall Cavalier with the 3 IRA men inside burst into flames as it crashed into a parked car outside the home of the local vet. Closer inspection shows a fusillade of bullets which peppered the side of the car. The bodies of 2 of the men lie partially outside, covered by a tarpaulin. All 3 have been burnt beyond recognition. A balaclava lies in the roadway. Police say 2 rifles were recovered at the scene. Pensioner Elsie McElree, out for an early morning stroll with her dog, found the violent scene unfolding right around her.
Oh, well, I just heard shooting, that was all. I heard shooting was coming at the bridge.
And what did you see around you?
I just saw a lorry, but I looked in, but there was no one up. And then...
Was that the red lorry?
Yes, the red lorry.
Where were the soldiers at this stage?
They must have been behind that lorry. And I only saw one soldier, and then I saw the police up the top of the road.
Was there a lot of shooting?
There were just 2 or 3 bangs. A loud one.
You were quite lucky then.
I was, mind you, I was indeed.
The shooting happened at the lower end of the village, where a group of Protestant workmen gather at that time each morning to wait for a lift to work. There's no doubt that they were the terrorists' intended targets. The scene is only yards from the garage where 3 Protestants were gunned down by the IRA in March 1989. The owner, Leslie Dallett, and 2 friends, Ernie Rankin and Austin Nelson, were shot dead in that attack. Local Sinn Féin councillor Sean Begley today, representing the families of the 3 dead IRA men, tussled with police who refused to let him up to examine the scene. He accused the security forces of using unreasonable force and of covering up the facts. He was eventually arrested and driven away. The dead men were Lawrence McNally, aged 39, married with a daughter, from Londonderry outside Coagh. His brother Phelim was shot dead 2 years ago when loyalists went to kill a 3rd brother, Cookstown Sinn Féin councillor Francie McNally. 37-year-old Peter Ryan, who'd been on the run for 10 years since escaping from Crumlin Road jail. His cousin was shot dead by loyalists at a bar at nearby Washing Bay 2 years ago. And Tony Doris, a 21-year-old single man from Coal Island, a cousin of a Dungannon Sinn Féin councillor. The MP for the area was quickly on the scene this morning.
Terrorists were on their way to do murder. I'm thankful, very thankful, that the terrorists have received their just reward and that innocent life has been spared. And anyone who comes out to condemn the activity of the security forces today have no consideration or thought or heart for the innocent of Ulster.
Mr McRae said this was an example of what the security forces could do when their hands were untied, and called for a military rather than a political strategy. A call rejected by the Catholic Primate of Ireland, but strongly condoned by Mr McRae's party leader.
It shows that the government have the resources. It shows that they have the intelligence. It shows they have the manpower. And it shows they're capable of defeating the Irish Republican Army menace. And they have got to continue to do that. And I hope that this type of thing will gather momentum and that inside a month we will see such a force of attrition with the IRA, that the menace will be stopped in its tracks. And I think that the time has now come for a full-out war to the death against the IRA and all its works.
That is not the answer. That is not the problem. The problem is not one of a total community in conflict with another total community. It's not one that can be met by military means. There is no military way of overcoming paramilitary violence, and any security policy that would lead to, as it inevitably would, to heavy harassment of one community will not succeed. It will play into the hands of the terrorists on either side.
I think what is obvious is that the IRA and others are seeing the difficulties that the political process is having at the present moment of time as their opportunity. What I think they're trying to do is either frighten people within the Northern Irish political community or to make it more difficult to proceed towards proper negotiations. I hope all parties have sufficient will and commitment to ensure that that won't happen.
The 3 UDR soldiers who died in a massive IRA bomb blast at their base at Glenanne in County Armagh on Friday night have been buried today. The trio were killed when a lorry packed with explosives was rolled down a hill, smashing into the base. Today, a Protestant church leader who spoke at the funerals said anger over the killings was justifiable, but he said retaliation was not the answer.
The Church of Ireland primate, Dr. Robin Eames, admitted it was one of the most harrowing days he'd ever known, travelling around County Armagh to speak at each of the funerals of the 3 UDR men, all members of his church. The primate had visited the scene of carnage at Glenanne shortly after the £2,000 bomb blast, and he said he'd seldom been more overcome with horror and disgust. The first UDR soldier to be buried today was 44-year-old Private Sidney Hamilton from Gerrard's Pass. The funeral was to Mullaglass Parish Church on the Armagh Road, 4 miles from Newry. Archbishop Eames delivered the same message to mourners at all 3 funerals. He said he could understand the anger, resentment and frustration of people here at the renewed terrorist onslaught.
There's nothing unchristian in being angry. It's what you do with your anger that marks out the meaning of a community. Retaliation is playing right into the hands of those who have done this, and meeting evil with evil is not going to achieve anything. But I also have to ask some very serious questions as someone who has tried to bring understanding in this community, and that is, are we all doing all that we can to stop this? Is the government really conscious of its real responsibilities, and is it doing everything it can to end this? It's no use platitudes on an occasion like this. It's no use saying to people, look, the people on the ground must do more to come together. People are trying to do that, but until the threat of terrorism is taken off their backs, it's no use simply saying to people, you need to do more. There are responsibilities at every level. There are responsibilities for political leaders at the moment to ask themselves questions. Are they doing enough to overcome the obstacles to dialogue? Are they doing everything in their power? If they are on the side of good, if the government is on the side of good, if the community is on the side of good, you cannot shirk these questions.
Private Hamilton, who was married with 3 children aged between 3 and 21, was buried beside another 14-year-old son killed in a road accident just 18 months ago. Afterwards, many of the mourners, including politicians Jim Molyneux, David Trimble and the Reverend Ian Paisley, travelled on to Rich Hill Parish Church for the funeral service for 30-year-old Private Paul Blakely, a married man with 4 young children aged between 2 months and 7 years. It was revealed today that Private Blakely had been mentioned in dispatches after being hurt in an IRA landmine attack near Armagh in 1984, when, despite his own injuries, he helped rescue colleagues from their Land Rover.
I think he was well aware of the dangers. He has had a few narrow escapes in years gone by.
But it didn't put him off?
No, it didn't, not in the least.
What's the feeling here in Rich Hill over what's happened?
The feeling that I've picked up at the moment is the futility and the uselessness of this kind of thing, together with some sympathy for his widow and family. They are shattered. My own hope would be that as days go on, we get more and more cooperation with the security forces. Try and enable them to stamp this kind of thing out.
46-year-old Bobby Crozier was the last UDR victim to be buried late this afternoon. The funeral was to Kilclooney Parish Church outside Market Hill, where a short time ago UDR colleagues accorded Corporal Crozier full military honours. Corporal Crozier lived in Market Hill and he'd served with the UDR for 21 years. He has two grown-up daughters, one of whom is currently Market Hill's festival queen. The family had to wait 7 hours on Friday night before it was confirmed that Corporal Crozier was dead.
Very agonising wait indeed until the worst was confirmed. I think perhaps they felt in their hearts that it would be the worst because they hadn't been given much hope. But still, human beings cling to hope, and they did hope overnight until those hopes were dashed.
And was there any reaction of bitterness?
Certainly not that I have come across. There has been within the family, of course, a reaction of great sadness. But Bobby himself was the kind of man in the community who spoke to everyone and entered into everyone's joys and sorrows. That was the way he lived, and I think that they've reacted in that same spirit to this tragedy in their lives.
Security force members based at St Angelo outside Enniskillen escaped injury this morning when a mortar bomb attack failed to go according to plan. The attack was mounted from a lorry driven into a yard at the Ballycassidy sawmill beside the base. 5 of the 6 mortar bombs did not fire as intended. They exploded on the back of the vehicle. The other failed to detonate. No damage was caused at the security base. The explosion happened moments after the lorry driver had made his getaway from the yard in a car later found burnt out. In Antrim this morning, there was an explosion in a temporary building at a contractor's yard on the old Ballyrobin Road. It happened at around 10:30. No one was injured.
The IRA has admitted responsibility for yesterday's booby trap explosion that seriously injured IDB official Celia Gurley. The Provisionals say she was not their intended target, and they've issued an apology. It's understood Mrs Gurley lost her legs in the blast at her home in Drumbeg. A number of people are still being questioned about a bomb found on Straban's Melmount Road last night. It was made up of Semtex and shrapnel, and it was defused at around 4 o'clock this morning. The well-known firm Brookmount Properties is one of 4 local companies to have called in the receivers. Along with Centre Management Services, CFF Partnership Associates and Tower Mill Properties, Brookmount control the Park Centre, the Boucher Retail Centre and have a substantial interest in the Abbey Centre